can inspect it and figure out what helper method to call on that.
You mean you notice that there's a property in the payload? You don't have CLR type to tell you what's the type of the property, so you basically just gonna return it on.
Yeah, we don't want to guess, and in some cases, maybe if it's a true or false, maybe we could, but that's TBD.
Having said that, I know that we are not discussing exactly this feature, but it seems that in a lot of cases where there's a property in the payload that I don't have a CLR property for, I kind of just want to round trip it. Therefore, parsing to a DOM is kind of useless work. I may want to basically just round trip it, which means just give me the bytes so I can put them back somehow.
Yeah, having a JSON element lets you easily round trip it.
Yeah. Well, except it's expensive. So if I want to round trip it, it's easier to just get the bytes and then write the bytes back, as opposed to creating a DOM. Especially if the property is like a complex thing. Let's say it's an array. It's kind of expensive to parse it.
But other needs have come up, such as we've seen places that have they're in a reader loop over properties, and then once they hit a particular property they want to call a callback. Right now they're using the JToken API. This is effectively the equivalent of the JToken API. So this is when you want to move your control from the reader into the DOM without figuring out the byte range that you were operating over and sending those bytes back to the DOM yourself. So.
And I assume that it would stop when it hits the kind of the close.
Yeah, so it reads one value.
It reads one
value. So if you're a string, a true, a false, a null, or a number, it doesn't move the reader. Mm-hmm. If you are a start object or an end object, a start object or a start array, it consumes and then leaves it positioned at the equivalent end. If you're a property name, it first moves forward and then do whatever thing I just said. And if you if you've created it but never moved it at all, then it moves forward one.
So should the method be called parse value, not just parse, to make it clear that I cannot parse arbitrary JSON?
This didn't update the example. The current proposed name is read from. So we can call it read value from.
Yeah, because basically, read from, I could assume that you're going to read, for example, property name and property value if I position the reader at the property name. And it will fail, correct?
If you're at the property name, it moves to the value and then reads the value.
Oh, it does move, so it doesn't fail.
Correct.
I see. And can I somehow get the name of the property?
You should have checked it before you passed it to me. Again, the cases we've seen for this is that somebody has effectively a switch on the property name, and they say, oh, this is the one that I need to go to the DOM. And it was a question of, do they need to call read and handle the false, or just give it to us in that state, and we'll call read to move to the value and then handle it. So in the property case, it's assumed you already knew it was at a property, you already checked the property.
So why would we not basically rename the method to basically and make semantics super crisp? You have to be positioned at the beginning of a value. And then, if you're at the beginning of the property, you have to first read it on the reader, basically consume it. And then, because then we can name the method, try read value, and the semantics are super crisp. Right now, the semantics are kind of, you have to explain, like, if you position at the value, it reads the value, returns to the value. If you position at the property, it consumes the property. It doesn't give you this property back, it just gives you the value, and like,
I'm fine with that. Ason is the one who. So I started with that. Not that it was named read value, but I started with the you can't be at a property name, and Ason showing me the cases that people wanted this convinced me that they don't want to have to do the extra call to read and deal with the fact that it could return false. They want to just call the API and let the API tell them what happened.
It would be interesting to know whether Ason wanted this as just a convenience and he didn't care, or there's a stronger reason than he doesn't want to call one more method to read a property name. I mean, it's not read property name; it's basically read, right?
Yeah. Again, I'm fine with read value. I'm fine with read value that throws with its property name.
What do other people think?
I think that makes more sense to me. Like, I was originally suggesting maybe something like Because I think read from versus parse seems both like you kind of have to read the fine print. I was thinking like partial parse or something like this, but I actually like read value more. Maybe even parse value.
Yeah.
Part of the problem, what you're saying with the semantics, is that this behaves the same as skip. So people are familiar with the semantics of I'll skip the property name and I'll move to the next value.
What's skip?
Like skip on reader. If you want to skip the next token, it skips the property name and then the value.
So this one is skip and read.
Sure.
Does skip always skip, or only
It
sometimes?
skips the property name.
You see, this one doesn't always skip. Just sometimes skip.
No, it'll skip the property name if it's property
This
name.
does the same thing as skip does. Is the reader is at the end of the what we were talking about this of the logical value. So if you're at a property name, the logical value is the thing that's coming next. And if you're at an actual value, the logical value is the thing.
So this one is basically skip and read.
Right.
It's skip into DOM. Yeah.
So why do you need it? Why don't you just call skip?
Well, because calling skip means you ignored the data. This is you want the data as the DOM.
No. You skip ignores the property name, right?
Skip moves. If you're at a property name, it moves to the next thing, and then if it's a value, it stays there, and if it's a array or an object, it then keeps going until it hits the end of that object or array. So the next call to read is at the next property name.
So ignoring what Krista suggested, the current behavior, if you just compare this between skip and read from, they're both doing the exact same positioning, except that one of them returns the value, the other one doesn't.
Yeah. So if you called read from and didn't ignored the return of this, it's the same as if you called skip on the reader.
Well, we could just go with skip value and read value then, and it's like, well, make a decision what you want. You want the data or not? And honestly, at that point, I personally wouldn't care whether we skip the property name or not. So if you can just say, well, if you call read value on the property, like, well, we just skip to the value, and like that seems still fine to me. Like,
why do you want to call it a value? Because value is overloaded, right?
Because I mean, if you look at, so I think for skip it may not matter, but I think for, what do you call this one? Because I think read from versus parse, like what's the difference?
They want to encode in the name that it only reads one value instead of the.
And also that it basically communicates to you where you should position the reader.
So in the natural position of the reader is I'm reading some in my loop. I'm reading some payload. I hit a property which identifies some payload. It's already a property name. Why force the user to say skip the property name now?
Well, if the user is in this case, sure. I'm saying I look at the APIs, and from the signature today, I have no idea what I can pass as the reader.
You can pass any.
You can explain. If you explain to me, yes.
No, but
if I read
you can pass the
documentation
reader at any state.
Well, that's not obvious from the signature.
Well, no. If you put it in array, that
if you put it inside an array, can I?
Inside an array, it'll read one value.
End of array?
It'll throw, because that doesn't make any sense.
Anyway, so that's my point. It's not clear from the signature what works, what doesn't, what state of the reader does or doesn't.
Okay.
If the method was called, read value, I kind of would assume that I have to put it before that value.
But does that add more confusion? Because read value could mean just primitive JSON values, string, number, bool, rather than.
That's not the
array
definition
is
of
a JSON value.
Yeah. An object is a JSON value.
But we call JSON value, as we're talking about here, JSON element. So should we say read element?
That also works.
That's
the reason I'm saying is because value is generic, right? We have no APIs that talk about values.
Okay. Then call it element.
Any objection to parse element?
Read element from?
It's just basically the method on the reader is called read. Suddenly we would have basically two terms for the same thing.
I mean, the read uses the standard. This is going to have a side effect on the thing that it's operating on.
Oh, but so this is the reader. This is the parser, correct? DOM.
Yeah.
What do we call the method on DOM?
Parse.
Parse.
But you always give it the text string, whether it's UTF-8 or.
So there's no state effectively, right? There's no.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, quite frankly, how would I think? I forgot. Like I think in the .NET framework, it's mostly parses stateless, reader-wise. I think everything else is a thing called read or load.
Well, the constructor or the static method JSONDocument.parse is not stateless.
It doesn't alter any of your input.
Yeah, stateless in the sense that it doesn't advance any sort of cursor because you give it data. There's no cursor that is modified as a side effect of you parsing.
And if we ever add a stream,
Oh, sorry, we have a stream when it drains the stream. So it kills the stream.
So
Yeah,
then on a single type
consistent,
using different terminology, read and parse is kind of a bit weird unless we can explain what the difference is. Why we call one parse and one read.
Right, and right now the difference is this API does a single value and the other APIs assume that the contents you're giving them do represent only a single value, and they throw if there's a value after the value. Because
the explanation is too long. If it's more than one sentence, it doesn't pass the bar.
This reads a value, the others ensure a single value. So the others are single, and this is first.
Yeah, in XML the naming convention is pretty consistent. It's like parsing is only from text. Load is always from something that you advance. And then for the reader, like they call it read because the whole reader structure is like obviously reading. I mean, we could go with load, or we could just go screw it, it's close enough. And I think one of the reasons why we went with different terminology in framework is if you have a method that takes a string, it's unclear whether that's a path or whether that's the actual content. So that's why you say parse with a string, like what do you want it to do?
Yeah, like load from URI.
Yeah, load from URI or load from file path. Yeah. Like I mean, personally, I think we should just pick one, but I don't think we need to be necessarily consistent with XML. But I think also the crystal, like let's just pick a convention here and then just stick to that. It's a bit weird to have both on the same type. That would be unfortunate.
So what we think you read element from that ends up returning a document.
Why don't we return element?
Document is the disposable thing. Element from an element you can't get back to the document. An element is just a cursor.
Read single element.
Right, and that's the problem with putting the word element in it is we're not returning an element, we're returning a document.
Right.
Could you return element? No, right? Because elements don't exist in the
I mean,
right?
I can make the document and then only return document.root element, and you just can't see the document.
There's no back pointer from the element to the document?
Not that's exposed.
Then who would hold the reference?
That would be a different thing that we're going to get to if we can close on this one.
What?
Which is making,
no, but in this case,
having non-disposable document.
Sure. In this case, if you were to return an element, then who owns the reference? For this particular API, nobody.
Right.
Which is why.
Which would mean that it would need to be the GC tracked and not the pool, or it need to be GC backed and not pool backed.
Which is
so
why
that
I think
you can just let it live off and die.
More sense.
So looking at the APIs now, I see we have parse with stream, we have parse with stream. You might regret that.
We haven't shipped, we can rename it.
I would probably rename the one that takes stream to load, and then if you ever want to offer one that takes a path, we can. I know we couldn't be able to do that.
Load and load value, and try load value.
That works for me.
You mean this one would be called load value?
Yeah. So like if you look at the existing APIs, this is what we have.
Except does load convey that the reader state is moving?
That's basically what we did in XML. So XML basically says when you say load on a document, you pass a stream or you pass a file path. Parse is always just the data. There's no.
But so imagine at some point we had try read from overload that takes a span. Now we call it load. Like
why would that one? If we have a.
I already have basically I have the JSON.
We have one like parse, right? That would continue to be called parse because that's the data. Like really memory of byte.
I think you would end up with saying you would say the load prefix for when you have a cursor. You would use the parse if you don't have a cursor, and then you basically suffix it with element or not if it's partial or not.
The problem with this one is now I don't know this convention, And now I have to like check in IntelliSense in two different places whether you take the data type that I have. You know, I have a stream, okay? Which method should I use to basically get the freaking data out of my stream and into the JSON document? Parse. Oh no, shoot, parse. BCL team thought that parse is not consuming. Okay, so now let me try the other one.
Well, but like go the other way. Let's say you want to have a convenience API that just given a file path reads the document. How would you do that?
Say it again.
So let's say you want to add a convenience overload, just the stream one. It just takes the file path. How would you do that today?
Stream?
Yeah. So basically, you want to say, you know, we have this in the framework, right? X document dot blah, and you give it a path and just reads the content of the file. How would you add that API here? Because you would basically say, logically, it's an overload to parse.
Yeah.
But there's one that stream, there's one that takes file path. Well, except the one that takes string is parsing the contents of the string. It's not using it as a file path.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And that is the thing where the framework went with load for other things, and everything else is parse. So in that sense, it's unfortunate that string is ambiguous, right? Because you don't know what it represents.
But yeah, so exactly. So we have kind of because string is overloaded, we would now complicate the API.
Well, you would be consistent with XML, you could argue. But honestly, like, yeah, if you want to close the door on the never expose the path, calling everything parse is also fine.
And then we could add parse from path or something like that. I think the value is larger with all these methods. Basically, I have some data type, I want to parse it. I go to one place in IntelliSense and I just try to pass my data type.
Sure. All right, so parse, all the existing parses stay parse, including the stream one.
Either parse or
and then this becomes parse value and try parse value to indicate that it's a single thing instead of the whole thing.
And we're okay with value because we don't like element because we can return element.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay, that works for me. So that means
again, like the API documentation say it reads a value, and then we can later decide how we feel about property.
So we really, like in other places in APIs, value specifically means a primitive.
So the only place with JSON right now that uses the word value is the DOM. It has an enum called, so the reader has JSON token type, and for the DOM we added JSON value type to indicate what type the value is. So
in that
case,
case,
does give the notion that an element is a value.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
So we are consistent with the terminology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully the writer wins. And then we can get to the one that
so I think
actually
the one thing to
needs
note is that if in the future we're going to review skip again, should we change skip on the reader to skip value to match this? So right now we call it skip because JsonWriter calls skip and everyone understands the skip semantics.
Except I don't understand it, so not everybody.
So everybody who uses JSON.NET understands the skip semantic. It's a common.
I use JSON.NET and I don't understand the skip
because you don't need to worry about it.
Yes, it took Aslan and I like 20 minutes doodling on a whiteboard before we understood JSON.NET skip
But
semantics.
the point is,
but
it does the right thing that you would naturally expect, which is why you never have to worry about it.
Yeah, if you're in a loop, it makes sense.
Right.
Okay. All right, so 36153.
numbers are really bad with numbers. Just
JsonWriter redo. Second one.
Yeah, there we go.
At the time, I thought you were just going to type in the URL, but you went back to the list. Okay. On a proposal before the writer actually existed, when we were adding the DOM, we suggested that the writer should be able to take a DOM after the writer existed.
Good. Really?
Yeah.
It says it on my calendar. It's still the other one.
It says on the press.
All right. In that case, guess you.
This one actually says no. Let's figure it out.
All right.
Sorry, we're doing also an
Maybe you can join forces.
So once the writer existed and they were being hooked up, then it was felt that it was a layering inversion to have the writer understand the element and that the element should understand the writer. So this is moving those write methods onto element, and write to and write value to are sort of matching the write and write value are matching the reader's definition of property versus not a property, and the two is because I take a destination that I'm going to modify.
JSON element, write to writer. Oh, it advances. It basically gets the property name from the element.
Well, this is you want to write the current element as this property name.
Oh.
To the writer.
What if the current element is a property?
Element can't be a property. Element is a value. Property is a property. And if you want to write a property, call property.element or property.value.write to writer and property name.
The property type has the name.
Yeah.
If you want it.
So it's right. So element.
Yep.
Can be an object.
Element is
Right.
an object, an array, a true, a false, a null, a string, or a number.
So basically, you select the property with the given name and write it to the writer.
Well, you select the value that you want to write,
Yeah.
and you write it to the writer with the given name. The name it had in the incoming payload is irrelevant. You have a value. You're looking at an object. I don't care what you name the local.
Oh, I see what you're saying. The element here is the value.
Yeah.
I see. So I have to say, I was looking at the signature of this method, and I was thinking that if element is a complex object, you're gonna select a property given the parameter and write it to the writer. Write the value of this property to the writer.
It writes the value of this property to the writer, and if you use the
No,
property,
It's not doing any search.
it doesn't.
Yeah. That was not super clear to me. I don't know if it's a problem that other people would have, whether we want to solve it or not. But it's not super crisp from the signature.
Okay.
Does it help if
Which of these two options you're doing?
Does it help if we reorder the parameters and have the property name come first?
I don't know. It's hard. I don't know how to change the method name. I don't think it's the order. Order wouldn't help.
Alternatively, we
like,
bizarrely make an
how-
extension method off the writer in the same assembly that essentially puts it back to what the previous thing was, but it felt that was...
Yeah, you see, the previous ones make it like they basically look super clear what's going on.
Why do we care about the layering here?
The reader and writer are the lowest layer. The
Well,
writer
okay,
should not be depending
yeah.
on the document.
But we ship it in the same assembly, so why do we care?
It's in terms of the architecture of the types themselves.
Sure. But within the assembly, I don't know why we would ever care. Like, you will not ship the DOM separate from the reader writer, so why would we care that they have the dependency on each other?
But the thing is, now you've tightly coupled the writer to the element, and now the writer needs to know internal details of the element and document. Right now,
I mean,
So that's a different argument, but I would say that looking at the APIs, I would agree that these APIs are clearer than the other ones. And I think, I don't know, layering to me makes sense if you cross assembly boundaries. It doesn't make sense within an assembly. Because you're not going to ship them as individual units.
I think it makes sense even within an assembly because it allows better refactoring later without breaking things.
you don't necessarily want to tightly couple these components.
What would you change?
Well, I mean, like, for example, stream exists in the same assembly as everything else in Corelid, but we wouldn't want to inverse the layering there and have stream have intricate knowledge of all the types. Instead, we have everything take a stream, and then they can use the stream to write their data as they see fit without stream having to have any of that internal knowledge.
But I mean, there is a balance. I mean, I agree with you because there are some types that are very different in terms of whether they are high level, low level. For example, I would definitely not think a dependency from the writer to the serializer is a good dependency,
Right.
despite the fact that they are in the same assembly. I wonder whether the DOM and the writer are not close enough that we would treat them as a single feature.
I think it's the thing where if everyone else in the universe is going to have to do it this way, then we should probably be exposing it this way as well, because then it's fewer concepts for people to remember.
So what if we called them write as value and write as property? So it says as, so it's indicating it's not doing a search. And again, I went with these names because it matches what's on the writer, but if we want to look at it as what would make sense for the element instead of what makes sense for the writer, then maybe write as value and write as property.
I think it would improve. I still like the previous API much better. I'm using the writer. I want to write stuff. I end up having an element because I just read it from somewhere. I want to write it. I would kind of never think about going back to the element.
Like this person, JSON.NET has similar APIs that we have in JSONElement, which is the J token takes the writer and say, I'll write to the writer here this way. Like, which is again the whole inversion of layering. That's why JSON.NET has it that way.
Honestly, from a usability standpoint, if we really, really care about the layering, might make them extension methods. Usability is so much better. Like, it is so weird. If you read code, you say writer dot write blah, write blah, write blah, and all of a sudden it's JSONElement dot write to the writer. It's like, what happened? Like, it makes no sense when you read code.
But I mean, that's again to take Tanner's argument with stream, right? You're like stream.write, and then some other thing .write, and then you give it the stream.
Yeah, but nobody calls writer on a stream. Like,
no, it's the people who are doing the internals with stream. They take the stream, they do the writing. That way users don't have to. It's just the layering that all these things have. That way you don't have.
No, I'm saying the amount of users that
complex.
actually call write on a stream, we can count them on two hands effectively. But I think if you look at the normal usability of every writer in the world, you call writer.write. Like, that's how every writer in the world works. Which is why, if you care about layering, so I did the same thing, right? I have my own data structures that I want to write to a text writer, or my own that I want to write to. I just add an extension method where I can literally call writer.write customer, because it just reads much nicer. So if we care a lot that we don't want to have these APIs in writer, great, then just add an extension type somewhere where these guys live. But it seems very inverted to go to the element and say, write yourself over here. Like, that's just not how any writer.
In your example, though, you're interleaving all these write calls with element.write. A lot of use cases, it's I have an element someone gave to me. I want to write to the writer, and that's all I'm doing. I'm not doing anything else with the writer.
Sure, I still think it's not necessarily super intuitive to do it this way, but yeah. If you only call one method, then it's not too bad. I agree with that.
I mean, we can certainly do both. We could call it write as value and write as property here, and then add a JSON element extensions that lets you do it as what looks like a writer extension or writer invocation.
Not worth it. And also the usability argument is weaker, I have to say, because I mean we don't shoot for usability for the JSON reader writer.
That's fair still.
But still, I think we are. In this particular case, I don't know why I would want to create a guideline on the fly, and I don't know why. This layering thing doesn't bother me at all.
I think
These
Jan's the
types
one
to
who...
me are like...
The concern is if you have separate components, we should not treat one component's internals visible to the other. By tightly coupling them, you're hurting the maintainability of the implementation.
But what do you mean by visible?
So in fact, the way that this will work is if we were to do it, because we've decided. So one of the questions that came up while designing this, to talk about the feature a little bit, is a JSON element which has a pointer, or has the ability to say this was my input stream. Just take the stream as it was and copy it into the writer, or should it observe the writer's settings with regards to indentation versus minimization and escaping rules once we figure out all that. And what we said is it makes more sense to say that they don't know about each other and that it will do it sort of token by token, so that the writer, like, the fact that you went from element in the middle means that you still end up consistently pretty printed or consistently compact. And
in terms of expectations from the user, this is the only one that makes sense.
Yeah,
because
so
what
they have
happens
to
if in the other case,
reach backwards and ask
Right.
element, like start walking through all of your things piece by piece. And the best way that we can do that is element can walk its structure linearly without having to go.
The location of these methods really impact the semantics that we can.
No, I'm just saying, like, technically speaking, the internal implementation, if we put it on the writer, is the writer's going to turn around and call an internal method on element, which
Right.
is this method.
Yeah.
So,
Then you've got Immo's proposal of make these extension methods. That way, the extension class
Yes.
has the internal knowledge, but it's still exposed on the writer.
well, at the end of the day, the element's the only thing that actually knows how to write itself to the writer.
Frankly, I think them knowing about each other is actually a benefit. What I would do is, if the setting on the writer is pretty print, then we do it element by element. Otherwise, we have a fast code path and we just grab the payload and copy it.
Well,
Right.
but now the concern with that is what if the payload is in inconsistent formatting,
Too bad, actually.
right? So I don't know. That would be surprising, I think. If someone wants to write minimized, and the payload is in an inconsistent format, and they'd say, okay, I'm not going to set indented to true, what do they get? They don't
You
get
mean
minimized.
like if the payload is actually, for example, indented, but I
Sure.
said that I don't want,
Right.
suddenly I have some indents
Right.
in the
Yes.
middle.
In terms of user
Fine,
expectation, this is the only thing that is cleanest and makes sense based on what users expect. The other one is more easy to use, yes, in terms of discoverability, and it makes sense on the writer, but
yeah, so,
The
I mean,
semantics
It's
don't
not
match.
only easy to use. What I was proposing is fast, correct? Like if I have a massive JSON array, I want to just
Right.
mem copy.
yeah,
yes, that it will be faster.
Yeah.
But it can violate a lot of. The writer right now by default makes sure that everything is transportable on an ASCII stream instead of a UTF-8 stream. And the element, if UTF-8 data came in and we did the blit, it would write UTF-8 data out, which means that your writer, without you configuring it to tell it UTF-8 is actually safe, is now mixing ASCII escaping and UTF-8.
Oh, but we don't know on the source, on the element, what we have. What?
Doesn't know what it has.
Really?
It doesn't know if it was. I mean, it knows whether something was escaped or not. It doesn't pay attention to whether or not it was UTF-8 or ASCII.
Oh, just UTF-8 or ASCII. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. Good. You kind of would have to assume UTF-8.
At which point it has to call the escaper anyway, at which point it has to do it token by token. So.
You're saying because in the JSON element, the payload could be not escaped.
Yes.
Really? Do we
We-
not
we-
validate it?
We support reading UTF-8.
We don't validate it when we build the database?
No.
Oh yeah, we also don't even validate it's a legal UTF-8 string. He just validates that like the quotes were in the right place and there were some bytes in the middle. So,
So we consume potentially valid JSON in the reader?
No, the
in
JSON will
DOM?
be valid. Your JSON strings could contain invalid data.
could contain non-decodable byte sequences.
Then, well, you copy it. You know it's fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
Anyway,
yeah, going back to the layer, I think that this layering, I don't see much value in. I think
To be clear, when I say
But
layering,
I
to
don't
me it's
care too
about
much.
API dependencies. If there's an issue where you need interns visible to implement the thing, that's an argument I buy much more.
right.
If
So
it's
I
just
mean,
about API X depends on API 2, but both communicate by
Right.
public APIs, I care zero about
so I mean,
this.
you know, just and again, just to play devil's advocate here, we had a bunch of things in MS Core Lib and Framework where it's like, sure, it makes sense that these things would want to talk to each other, and then when we moved to Core, we went, man, we needed to drive a wedge between these two things because they really made no sense to talk to each
because
other.
they were separate features.
Yeah. So then the question is the DOM a separate feature from the reader and writer, or is the
Yeah,
DOM
I
an
agree.
extension
That-
of the reader and
I
writer?
agree. I agree.
And that's a fuzzy area that
Right.
Jan believes no, Christoph believes yes. And
Well, I wonder whether Jan is concerned with this unsafety, correct?
No, he's concerned with the layering. He brought it up as maybe.
Well, but why does he consider them separate features? Because he sees one is safe for the kind of end user, for everybody, and one he wants to make it unsafe and stick it in.
I feel like
I think that's orthogonal. That was
Yeah,
compiler services unsafe.
I think this is more a question of, and every time stuff like this comes up, It's more, is this current layering going to prevent us from making changes in the future if needed? And the top layering can often prevent that, or make you have to make bad design decisions.
I totally understand, but look,
That was the primary concern.
object has a dependency on string.
Yep.
Yeah.
Would you, like, if you were designing the platform from scratch, you would not have it?
Well, that's a very, very hot topic argument that lots of people have opinions on and
I
have
think
blog
he's
posts
saying
across the internet. So I'm not going to comment.
So then string has a dependency on culture info, correct?
No.
And yeah, it does.
No, it has a dependency on a format provider. It does not have any dependency on globalization directly.
Okay, maybe something got removed. Last time we analyzed it, it was a hard dependency.
Well, maybe our internal implementation does, but the public contract is that...
The enums, it doesn't take the cultures.
Glossing over the details. There are some features in MS Collab I totally agree we screwed up. The transitive closure dependency number of types from object is like 700. Last time Lidge did this analysis. And it's way too much. But you can surely... You probably agree that we don't want, like, there is at some point where we would kind of over design it and kind of try to break every single type in the framework to just be a very clean tree. We have circular dependencies.
Yeah, except in this
they
case,
are fine as long as the thing is considered one feature.
Right. But I think in this case, this is a very normal pattern for splitting dependencies like this so that you don't have that circular dependency, and it's just a common pattern. It's not like we're saying this is something new we should do because we think there's a problem. We're instead saying this is a common pattern that people do to answer this specific thing.
I guess here's the easy question. Since you're now on a team that's in a completely separate code base from this, if you had a custom type that you wanted to write, are you going to write an extension method to make it look like it's right thing on the writer, or are you going to write a write to that you pass the writer into?
If I had what type?
So you have some type in the Azure SDK.
Yes.
You want to send it to a writer. Do you make a public method on that type that takes a writer, or do you make a new extension class?
Of course, I would not do this because my SDK type is not the same feature as the writer, so it's consistent with my
Fair.
Like.
But would you take the writer as an input, or would you make an extension method and make it look like an extension on the writer?
I would probably take a writer, unless you guys... for it.
Right, so, yeah, so to me that means that these should be just methods on JSONElement, because it's just a thing built on top of the reader and writer.
I guess part of it is the JSONElement knows how to write itself. So it is in the implementation detail, that is a natural location for it. Otherwise, there's a code smell where the writer is reaching into the internal components of the element all over the place for every implementation aspect.
I'm seeing them. They are one feature. JSON element is our writer's representation of a value. Because otherwise it's an untyped representation, like spans and strings and whatnot. It's basically a typed representation of a JSON value. But those are just two like philosophies of how you view a feature. So,
so that we can
get
to the thing that's
either of these solutions is, I think, is fine. I would prefer what we have today. If we rename the methods to write as and move the property name to first, it would improve, I think.
All right. So if it stays local, you think write as value and write as property, and then put the property name first. Okay. And then consider making it overloads of write and write value from the writer.
Okay, I'll give you another argument for leaving them as is on the writer. The writer is hard to use. And now you're polluting an API, like a very convenient API with a type that is not super convenient. Basically, there are lots of scenarios where I just want to use JSON DOM, and suddenly you kind of showing me some JSONWriter APIs that I'm as a user, maybe I don't care about. Versus if I'm already in the writer world, I'm doing some advanced stuff. I probably know what JSONElement is and how they relate.
Sure. So I guess part of the counter to that would be if someone's porting from JSON.NET, this API is easier to use.
Easier to find.
If people are porting from JSON.NET, they will use the serializer. How many people use writers?
No, because if you don't have a Cocoa object, you have to use the writer.
JSONElement is the equivalent of JToken. If you had the JToken,
okay.
if you're
we
using
think
JToken,
that our JSONWriter is for mainline scenario users who don't have Cocoa objects, then we better do what Jana's suggesting.
That's the Monday
option
meeting.
number 2.
Yeah, that's the
This type was originally designed and envisioned to be very low-level type for performance-oriented scenarios. I don't think we should be trying to make it now. Oh, it's if JSON serializer doesn't work for you.
So can we decouple those discussions to unblock this API?
Yes.
Because that API will have ripple effects. That is going to have ripple effects on all the APIs, right? We can't block on it. Especially for SignalR's use case, which is they need this type of API. One or the other.
And we've now talked about the two things you care about, right? Because
Yes.
you don't need detach.
So where do we land here? We just go with what we discussed and consider adding the extension method or instance method on the writer.
Okay. As the current only user of this API, which one do you think makes more sense?
I wouldn't use the property one at all, because we just use the writer for the property. So write as value 2 is fine for us.
Yeah, that's why that's vague. I don't think I wanted the 2-1 and there's a typo.
Yeah,
That's what we said, right?
There's other issues with the API.
But would you look for it on or do you think to you, does it feel more natural on the writer or on the element?
Probably the element, because we're already going to have the element for the value that we're writing. So it'd be kind of weird to go back to the writer.
Okay.
Why do you have an element and a writer somehow, and just write the element?
The element came from input, and the writer's what he's trying to write is the output.
Because I need bytes from the serializer to go into the writer, but there's no way to do that without going through the element.
What he really wants is JSON serializer dot write to the
Yes.
writer.
Yes.
We don't have that yet. This is a stopgap
Yes.
for that. Also, it solves other needs that people have.
This is the motivating scenario, but it's not the only scenario.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we can start the rabble discussion on the
But
final one that I have.
They are related. Imagine that we basically we move this type to some unsafe thing, as Jan was proposing. Well, we're gonna have some unsafe APIs on our JSON DOM.
But keep in mind the implementation will still, because it's tightly coupled in the other scenario, it's still there.
If
It's just
we
under the covers.
if we do that, like if we make it like dangerous UTF8 JsonWriter with literally no validation as the new name of it, then I would agree, and we should rip them off of here and move them there, or move them to an extension method or something that like gets it off of the.
I would prefer the extension
Okay.
method in that world.
If we don't do it, let's say we don't do what you just said, it still doesn't change the fact that this type is not super safe.
Again, that's Monday's meeting.
But I'm saying, in which world we're gonna end up in a situation where this JSON writer is just like awesome type for the average JSON.NET user who wants to write
So
something.
replace this JSON writer.
That's my goal of the Monday meeting. is to
There's
end up
no.
there.
I don't see how
Let's
we.
replace this ref JSON writer with a JSON.NET JSON text writer. Let's say that's what the type is. Now this API should live here. Because JSONDocument and JsonElement are the usable types. You have a usable text writer.
Sorry, somebody says something.
Do the thing. Yeah, and I kept thinking, which has to be like that. So if there's,
I think
Sounds like an accidental unmuted mic.
Yes, I remember.
Or the other meeting.
right. So if you decide to have a usable JSON writer that is a reference type, then this API would just change, but it would still live here. It would just change, the input would just change from UTF8JsonWriter, this ref struct, to something else.
Maybe. Let's give you grant you this, but I'm saying this. I don't see a world where this becomes a safe writer.
Well, okay, but why does it matter? So let's say let's say it would be a safe API. Would that be the right location then?
But that's my question.
If it was safe API,
Yeah.
no, I still stand behind my
so therefore I'm saying
but I'm saying like it's not end of the world. If it's kind of unsafe, then I think it's moves it several notches up to like, yeah, that's not the right design.
Fair enough.
Which is why I was saying that's a higher order thing which affects the design. But if, let's say, ignoring that, is it okay as a compromise to put this here in your mind?
I think it's okay. That's the bar.
All right. And, I know we only have 2 minutes, but I want to get a quick glance at the one that actually needs serious help on the names.
So can we just remove this one first so we actually get something done? So which one do you want to look at?
Clarity and control, the one in the middle.
Yeah.
All right, so the JSON document, if you give it a memory of byte, it holds the memory of byte instead of copying the memory. That's why part of why and then it uses array pool for the database structure that has the fact that it uses array pool is why it's disposable, so that you can clear it and put the stuff back in the pool. It also has modes where if you give it things that it has to convert because it currently doesn't understand them, such as strings, that it uses an array pool to hold the intermediate copy. There are notions that you want to be able to say, I need this to now live longer than the original using was going to, move me to a different kind of memory model, and we're calling that detach, which is you want to detach from the original input memory. Detach then has the notion, so there are really two questions with detach, are you trying to detach from the array pools and you want to be GC backed, or are you trying to detach from the original input memory? And this has created the notion, this has created a slightly confusing thing. And then I have an element and I want to just pluck this element out of the document and forget the rest of the document, let it get disposed, but hold on to only the small subset.
So that element, I totally understand the scenario and I think it's super valuable. I don't understand the detach on document. If I knew that I want to detach, I just copy before I pass you the memory.
But I mean, the cases in this would be that you only found out after inspection.
When would I find only after?
Let's say you have a component that's processing data. It brings a JSON document. Now I want to give it to some other component. Rather than me controlling the lifetime, I said detach. Now I've given the ownership to the other component.
Yeah,
they can store in a dictionary, whatever they can dispose later.
So somebody, if you pass the document to someone and they wanted to store it for later, they should store the output of detach and not the original document.
What would detach do when the instance already is detached?
If it's detached and using array pools, that means it's still disposable, so it copies itself into array pools again and gives you a new copy. If it's detached and you told it don't use array pools, and if you call detach on a thing that's already not using the array pool, it returns this, because it means that we have pure GC semantics, and when you lose the last reference, it goes away. The reason that this really needs help is because the two properties exposing the current thing that I've come up with for detach, one's called isDetached and the other's called isDisposable.
So if we just talk about, I'm still kind of I'm not sure whether the first scenario is so valuable, but as to the name, would clone make sense? Clone is kind of like it's already existing concept in .NET, and it basically is kind of like, give me a deep clone, it's now mine.
On the document. Because I think on element, detach makes sense. It's like take me out of the document that I'm in. Make me be a new thing all by myself.
It's a new term, detach in .NET. We don't have this concept. And clone is an existing one. Is there a big difference?
Well, clone makes sense to me. Copy would also make sense to me. I mean, the question is, like, for detach, right? Like, if you copy would imply you always copy. Clone kind of implies you always clone, right? If you say, if it's already detached, it just give you back to this pointer, then it's, that would be a slightly different semantics.
Detach is actually not new. We also use it in XML.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, detaches.
Really?
Yep, we've
I've
got
seen
it.
All right, we list do Zoom here, so we have to clean it up.
We've got an XML service model, ML configuration manager.
And what do they do?
Thanks, guys online.
Well, for XML, it looks like